Here's a sneak peek of my coffee station after I have it installed. Doors coming soon. So one of the strategies that I use when I'm making projects is I like to map out everything that I have. I highlight the sizes that I'm using and then my cut list. I use Cut List Optimizer to help me with that. But one of the reasons I like to cut before I join is I'm kind of small and long 8 to 10 foot boards are kind of hard for me to join evenly. So I'll take my boards and I'll cut them with about an inch and a half of extra, because as you're cutting, if the width isn't right, it'll be crooked anyway. So it gives me that wiggle room that I need, and then it gives me more proportional sizes when I take it to my joiner. So my joiner, like most of you, I'm sure, who have a small shop, it's not very large, so I don't have a lot of length on the back and front to balance it, and that is another reason why it is important for me to cut it down as much as I can ahead of time. Much like with all of my projects, here I am just making sure that I have one good solid side before I take it to the table saw. So I'll just show you how I do it with 2 boards and then we'll move on to the next step. Here you can see the little pencil marks. This is where I mark the widths of each of them and how I want to cut them. This way I'm better prepared when I head to the table saw. So when you see boards like this, they're awfully warped. I will actually take them and I'll cut them down half, sometimes a third at the table saw, and this helps with that warping. I'll also take off all of the bark or any defects that I see so that I can get a better cut for the width that I'm looking for. You also do really want to be careful when you have warp boards. As you can see here, I actually had to pull it out and try it again as it was starting to get pinched, and that's a risk for taking off fingers. After I'm done up at the table saw, my next step is biscuiting. So after some minor adjustments to make sure I have it for the right thickness of this board, here I go getting my biscuits ready for all of the boards. Now next up is the glue job. So I like to apply a thin layer of glue, smooth it out with my fingers, then put in the biscuits, and then apply another layer of glue over the top. And then you want to make sure that you clamp everything down because boards will warp if you don't do that. And then I reclamp the remaining so you have upper and lower. Next up, once it's all dried, is I'll take it to my sander and I will sand it this way. It is a life-saving step for me and I'm really glad I purchased this. Previously I would have had to do this by hand and it would take several hours, so I'll just make sure that I get both sides and that all of the marks that I don't want to see there are smoothed out. And because no one likes to watch a sand job, let's speed this up. The next thing I like to do is remove one of the uneven edges, and I'll take this Craig piece that I got to produce an even edge. I don't do both sides, I'll take the other side to the table saw, that way I know for sure it's a consistent measurement. Now here I'm taking my pieces to the table saw, so first I'll make sure I have an even width, and then I'll take the remaining once I'm done and I'll make sure that all the lengths are the same by cutting off the remaining uneven edge. I feel confident doing this on a table saw. Not everyone does, but this is how I like to do it so that my edges are straight. Now here I'm prepping the bottom board for Craig jigs. I do this because no one's going to see this surface anyway, and I've always found them to be very reliable. Since this is very heavy, every time I stood it up, it started to fall, so I thought this position was an easier way for me to assemble it. The next thing I'm doing here is making the dado on all of the sides and on the bottom. So if you're not familiar with a dado, it's essentially just a little trench for the plywood backing to be able to go into. So each of the inner sides have it on both, and then the outsides only have it on one, and the bottom also only has it on one. I only go about 3/8 of an inch or less down, and it's perfect for the plywood. Here's a little close-up so you can see it doesn't go all the way through, in case you're curious on how this works. The next thing I'm doing here is I'm pre-assembling the bottom with the sides. This is not necessary, however, I like to do this so that when I am gluing it back together after being stained and polyed, I know that it's all fitting in the right spot. It also allows me to make sure that my measurements for the plywood backing is 100% correct. Now here I am taking my plywood to the table saw after I validated it once I put it together, And ironically, this actually was perfect for the entire project. I was able to cut this in specific pieces and I only had a teeny amount left over, which was terrific. Now I'm beginning to prep the tabletop while all the other pieces are drying. This is 1 inch thick versus the 3/4 that I use for everything else. I did that because I like the tabletop a little thicker, so I did have to adjust my biscuit joiner in order to get these ready to go. When I glued my tabletop together, I only glued half, so this way I could take it through my planer and make sure everything was nice and smooth. Once I have these edges smooth, I will then take and glue the remaining 2 sides together. This helps save time in the sanding when we're all done, and it lets the piece come together much, much better. Now the pieces are ready, time to stain. Now the last step before final assembly is to put these little holes in for the adjustable shelves. This Craig fixture made it super easy. I have now applied my coat of espresso to these. I took these and I sanded them down to 220, and then I've already applied my 1 coat of the polyacrylic max. I like it because it's less coats needed for me. And then when I'm done, I just went and took some steel wool to make it nice and smooth. If I found that it wasn't effective, I would put 1 more coat on, but this has always been really good for me to just have the 1. So now it's time to take all these pieces and put it together. Here I am reassembling these boards as you saw me put together before, except this time I know that it's going to go together really well. So I'll apply my thin layer of glue, and then I'll start putting the screws on one side, and I'll come back around to the other. Once this side's done, I'll flip it over, and then we'll get ready to put on the remaining inside pieces. For this part here, it's really quite simple. I just cut a spacer that was the exact width that I was looking for to help me with alignment, and then I'll glue inside those dados to help put in the plywood piece. Once I have it in position, I'll just clamp and then screw them down with the Craig jig screws, and then I'll do the remaining pieces. The next thing I've done here is I've taken the finished tabletop and I am going to outline exactly where I want these pieces to go. So I want a trash opening and then one for the water. So I've drilled the 2 holes now in preparation for sawing, and I will begin taking that hole out. Once this hole's removed, I'm just going to make sure that it fits, and then I'll sand it real nice and clean through this entire piece, making sure that all of the pencil marks that I've made are cleaned up and that everything is nice and smooth. Finally, I'm taking my router and I'm just adding 1 accent piece. The rest of them will be up against a wall, so I don't need to do it with the remaining, but I don't like perfectly straight edges, so this is just adding a little chamfer to it. Finally, I applied a gray wash to the top, as you can see here. Now that the piece is essentially assembled, I had my son help me create the little bottom base. This will provide a little kick plate, and it's just some 2x4s that I got at the store. Here it is in its final position. I even checked to make sure that it's square, and it is perfect, which is terrific. Once again, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, feel free to like, share, comment, or subscribe.